Hello, everybody. It's the Great Dane, and I'm excited to drop this first Anthology episode, where we will be covering three topics. Given that this is the Thanksgiving episode, they will all be related to the holiday. We are going to cover the evolution of military tactics around the arrival of the Pilgrims in the New World, discipline in the holidays, and what it actually means to be thankful. Before that, I wanted to thank all of you for your support here and on my other platforms, and also Jonas and Constantine for this amazing Sons of the Steppe shirt, which they collaborated on, and which I finally received today. Kudos to both of them. I worked with Constantine on my drop, and Jonas, of course, is a good friend of mine. But without further ado, so let's talk early colonial warfare. And I'm talking Pilgrims specifically, kind of North America, not so much South America. But as you probably know, the Pilgrims are often depicted with blunderbusses, which are essentially black powder proto shotguns, if you will. Um, you see them with their little buckle hats and shoes, and they've got the big horned kind of musket looking thing. Now, blunderbusses did exist, but as I cover in a video that's going on TikTok and Instagram, short form, the blunderbuss was actually not in use by the Pilgrims when they arrived in Plymouth, and it wouldn't be invented for another 3 decades or so. We're talking mid 17th century when the blunderbuss started coming around, and it never was that popular in North America and in the United States, which is funny given America's later proclivity for shotguns. But that being said, as I cover in that video, the Plymouth colonists used armor. They used pikes, halberds, rapiers, cutting swords, and a variety of firearms, mostly matchlocks in the beginning, a few wheel locks, and proto flintlocks. They use flint and steel as the firing mechanism, but they're not considered by gun historians to be true flintlocks like you might see in the Revolutionary War. But the mechanics of that are kind of above my gun knowledge on what differentiates those different locks. But flintlocks were starting to come into prevalence, and they had both muskets and pistols for those. But what they found, and what I found was very interesting kind of researching this topic, is that this is right in the era of pike and shot. And pike and shot already is an incredibly fascinating era because you've got essentially what is a bridge in warfare from the medieval period to the Napoleonic era. You're going from, knights and crossbows to marching regiments and cannons and all that thing that kind of defines Napoleon and the Civil War and all that. It's really transitory era where you make a lot of leaps, not just in military technology, but societal organization and all of that. And in the middle of this dynamic transition period, you've got these various settlers coming to the New World and bringing it to a totally different set of people, totally different location and technology. The pre-European, the Native Americans, from the Aztecs up to the Iroquois, all up and down the Americas, they had their own systems of war and societal organization. And while it's broadly true that technologically speaking they were less developed, especially in military technology, they also just had fundamentally different systems of warfare in terms of how they organized and what their aims in war were and how they conducted warfare. And the terrain played a huge role, and specifically where the Pilgrims are landing, it's a lot of forest and just a lot of wilderness, a rough wilderness. And the first skirmish that happens between the Pilgrims and the And the natives, I can't remember which tribe specifically, but it's all fought at range. The natives used their bows, and the pilgrims fired back. There was a couple of them had flintlocks and could fire at a more consistent rate, while the matchlock using or not troops even, men just were able to get their matchlocks lit and return fire. No casualties on either side, interestingly enough. But what the colonists quickly found, because we always consider that we think, the Europeans came in with steel and firearms and that was that. But there was a lot of evolution on both sides of the equation as these two systems kind of encountered each other in this new environment. So, very quickly, the Pilgrims found that the pike and shot style of warfare was not suited for the wilderness of North America against these native tribes, and within their own system, because now they were far from home, trying to build a totally new settlement. They didn't have established cities or anything, and they didn't have the manpower or resources that armies did back in Europe, which helped kind of reduce a lot of the tactics, because a lot of the tactics, of course, in Europe were built around large armies that could have corps of infantry and cavalry and cannons and logistics and all that kind of thing. The Pilgrims didn't have any of that. They're essentially establishing tiny little, almost like early medieval in terms of size and social organization, kind of, not social organization, but these little fortified settlements that didn't have the manpower to wage war on an industrial scale. Tactically, first thing to go was the pike. The pike was unwieldy for the wilderness of North America. It was hard to maneuver, and they didn't have the manpower to form huge pike blocks. But even if they did, what they found was that the natives didn't like to engage in melee combat unless it was either an ambush or they felt they had sufficiently weakened the enemy so that they were guaranteed to prevail in close quarters. I mean, they did absolutely carry clubs and tomahawks and knives and even wore armor to a degree, carried shields, things like that. But they really liked to fight at range at first. So the colonists first tried to cut their pikes down just into spears, and they had halberds, kind of, because the pike and shot, of course, the pikemen are supposed to protect the firearm troops. But what they found is that the natives wouldn't engage the close quarters troops. They wouldn't charge the pike wall or the spear wall, and they wouldn't present something to charge. They wouldn't form up in battle lines that you could attack. If they felt like they couldn't win an engagement, they would kind of pull back into the forest and withdraw. So they pretty quickly ditched pole arms altogether, and far before Europe did, and put emphasis purely on the firearms in the musket-wielding troops. Now, they did still carry swords for close quarters. The bayonet hadn't come into prominence yet. And their rapiers and their cutting swords and even daggers were quite effective in close quarters if that came to it. But they really focused on the musketry, and the flintlocks quickly kind of overtook the matchlocks. Matchlocks were cheap and easy to repair, but they're very hard to use, and they're very finicky and unreliable because you have to have literally a lit cord that fire ignites the powder. So you have to keep it lit and make sure you don't blow yourself up when you're reloading, that kind of thing. But the next thing to go, and this is kind of surprising because armor was the next thing to go, and it went before it did in Europe. And we always think that European armies abandoned armor mostly because of firearms, which is true in Europe because firearms got to a point of efficacy where they could reliably punch through armor, and it was not worth the cost and the hindrance to mobility and the logistical strain for troops to wear armor because it just didn't really protect them anymore from the threats on the battlefield. So it was like, might as well not wear it. But why would the colonists abandon it when they were facing an enemy who primarily used weapons that the armor was actually very good at protecting against? It was more than capable of dealing with the clubs, axes, and arrowheads that the natives had. And what I read was that the maneuvering through the wilderness, what the pilgrims found in this kind of new irregular raiding warfare, there was one anecdote. They had fought a skirmish, and then they'd driven off the enemy, and they found some loot, but they were so encumbered by their armor, and not that pike and shot armor was even that heavy or anything, but that extra encumbrance made it difficult for them to take the loot back. And they found that they could actually dodge arrows reliably enough that if they took off the armor and they weren't caught in an ambush, it was kind of like an open firefight. They could weave through arrows and be fine. Of course, some of them would get caught, but it ended up being worth it to them. At first, they ditched the breastplates, and then the helmets went. It just ended up not being worth it, which I thought was very interesting, considering you would think it's the one place where we would have kept armor longer rather than shorter. Now, on the Native American side, they pretty quickly came to understand firearms. Now, firearms in this time had their disadvantages when compared to the bow, especially in terms of fire rate and accuracy, but firearms were more lethal, and they had a variety of advantages too. It wasn't people tend to underestimate early firearms and overestimate bows. But the natives quickly began trading for firearms and looting firearms when they could. So that's another reason why armor went with the colonists, is because it didn't take all that long for some of their native enemies to have firearms and be shooting back with firearms that could present a threat to that kind of armor, making it once again redundant. But it wasn't just firearms the Native Americans picked up. They picked up metal, steel, and they began using weapons of their design, clubs and tomahawks and knives that were made with steel, which made them, of course, more deadly, easier to use, more lightweight, everything. So it's kind of these two types of warfare meeting to create a third sort of in between. A lot of skirmishing, a lot of raids, a lot of ambushes, and a lot more firefighting than we see in Europe at the same time, to the point that American early colonial troops adopted paper cartridges, which had been in Europe a little bit prior, used by Sweden. King Gustavus Adolphus, I think was the famous Swedish king who campaigned quite well. Some of his troops used paper cartridges, but cartridges weren't really that popular, especially with infantry, and the colonists needed anything to make their firepower better. Since they had abandoned the pike, they needed to make their shot better. Every shot counts, and the cartridges were easier to load for the troops than pouring in the powder, measuring it, and doing it that way. Then putting in the ball and putting in the wad of paper, etc. So, well, they still poured the powder, and you know what I mean. Paper cartridges made it easier to get out more firepower. So it's very interesting how all that went down. and it was kind of a raid between fortified settlements. The natives had their own settlements and areas, and it reading about it reminds me more of like kind of Germanic or early medieval warfare, with these little polities kind of raiding each other back and forth, but not bringing a lot of big armies together for big battles. I mean, a few relatively large battles happened, but it was just a lot less concentrated than we might have think with other periods of warfare. It's very interesting. Switching gears completely. Discipline in the holidays. I've been on a cut, and it was a goal of mine to be at a point where tomorrow, oh, I'm recording this Thanksgiving, you're probably watching it Thanksgiving, that for this holiday I could eat like it was a normal Thanksgiving. Going home to see my dad, we're going to have a huge meal as we usually do, and I didn't want to be limited at all. But I didn't want to, sacrifice my goals either. I've been losing a lot of weight, and I'm slimmer than I have been, and I'm getting close, and I don't want to reset that progress going into the holidays. And I was thinking about it. I haven't been drinking the past few weeks, and you get to the point where it's like, there's always an excuse or a temptation that you've got to like splurge a little bit, It's like you work all week, you want to go out for the weekend because it's just one night, or sitting there, dieting 4, 5, 6 days straight, and you want to have a cheat meal, and you do. And it's not necessarily bad to do that, but you have to think, if you make little compromises, when it's time for the big compromise, you don't have any breathing room, right? If I had every week of this done a cheat day, let's say, I wouldn't have any. Thanksgiving would have to be more of a normal day. I couldn't splurge all the way, and I want to splurge all the way. And I think it's just not just with holidays and diet, but just anything. I think it's better to save whatever it may be for the moment when you really need it or really want to use it. Like, when they earlier talking about drinking, Halloween, I didn't go out, but I had a friend, and we'd been going out the past few weeks, and he'd been going out a decent amount and spending a good amount of money, and he was just like, my bank account's kind of tapped, I need a break for my health and wallet, which I totally get, and that's part of the reason why I did after Halloween, but he couldn't even go out for that night, which was sad. And it's like, were the 2 weekends before worth missing out the big holiday? It's like, it's what you gotta kind of think. Or think about a vacation. You want to splurge on little things every week. You go shopping, or you take yourself out, or whatever it may be. You make these little splurges, but then you never get the big holiday when everyone's going on a big vacation. You don't have the room. It's like when people take work off all the time, rather than saving their days for a big trip. It's like, or even with sick time. I know people who take their sick time just when they don't feel like going to work, and then all of a sudden they're actually sick. And it's like, well, you used all your damn sick time. Don't know what to tell you. It's that kind of short-term versus long-term planning, and I'm very guilty about not being good about that. That's what I'm trying to develop. So it's been a lot of times within the past couple weeks, a nice big meal sounds good, and I've been being good, or a nice beer sounds good, I've been being good on that, and it's just like, no, I've got goals, and I also have things that are going to be worth it, because there's always times when you should actually just indulge and enjoy. I'm a big believer that for celebrations and important moments, you need to get out and have fun and have a few drinks and have a good meal. I don't think you need to be rock solid David Goggins discipline 24/7, 365. We have holidays and these things for a reason. But you can't enjoy those if you're taking mini holidays all the time. Well, you can, but then you're just not going to meet your goals. And you have to decide, this is what I want, this is what it takes, and reconcile those. So I can't wait to absolutely stuff my face tomorrow. And that meant cutting down on some meals, even skipping some meals before in the preceding weeks. But it's going to be worth it to me, and I'm going to meet my goals and have an amazing holiday. And I think that's exactly how it should be. And there's been times in the past where I fell short of goals because I didn't do that. I took little cheats or whatever, and then the holiday came, and I wasn't willing to suffer in the holiday. Because who wants to do a meal prep on frickin' Thanksgiving? Nobody, right? Last topic. This is going now into language, something I love to get into. What does it mean to be thankful? Because we say thank you, I mean, so many times throughout a day. You say thank you every time you're out in public, doors held open, food service, grocery store, friends, family. You probably say thank you between 5 and 10 times a day, on a minimum if you're not doing much. But thank you is one of the most common phrases you encounter day to day. But it's like, what actually is being thankful? When you really try to describe it, it's something we do so much. It's almost like second nature. It's like, it's appreciation. But what is appreciation? To me, when I really think about it, kind of psychologically and in terms of human behavior and spiritually and everything, it's really an acknowledgement that whatever someone did for you or whatever situation you're in, if you're being thankful in a more abstract sense, like, it's that things could have been a different way. When someone helps you out, there was nothing compelling them to do it, or that they could have chosen not to help you out. And it's almost like an acknowledgement of debt in a sense, where it's not debt as in you have to make it up, but debt is like, wow, you really went out of your way to do this for me, and my life is better. And it very could have been you could have not done it, and my life would be worse. And it's to kind of bond you to that person and encourage you to reciprocate. It's kind of what we build social cohesion and trust out of. Or if it's something someone doesn't want to do and they do it anyway, it's kind of a thank you to. It's like a way of saying, I know you didn't want to do that, but here's me giving you kind of a psychological reward, which is thank you. And that's why I think we're so built to appreciate thankfulness, because when you think about it from like an evolutionary standpoint or something, or just like a purely secular standpoint, which I don't think is by any means the only standpoint or the only real standpoint, but just for the sake of this argument, it's like thankfulness isn't tangible. It's not like bartering when you trade a good or a service for another good or service. Thank you is just a feeling and an acknowledgement, a verbal acknowledgement. But nevertheless, we are built to put a lot of emphasis on what people say and communications that are abstract. So you kind of think about it, there is goodwill and reciprocity that go into a thank you. And I think that reciprocity is really important because it's easy to say thank you and then that's that, right? You said thank you. Um, some people in their mind, the transaction's done, if you will. You gave your appreciation. Um, Now this is empty. But that shouldn't be the end, especially when it's like a friend or someone in your life. You really want to compensate them, and whether that's, you know, not necessarily payment, but it's like next time they need a favor, you better be the first to step up to the plate. And that kind of is what loyalty is built on. Loyalty these days is kind of split into two sort of categories that don't really get the full picture. You've got, of course, relationship loyalty, which specifically in modern discourse refers to fidelity and not cheating on your partner, which, of course, is huge. That's a huge aspect of romantic loyalty, but it's not the only one. It's very big, of course, and it's unfortunate that so many people are willing to break that loyalty. But the other kind of loyalty, when we think of platonic loyalty, we almost think of it as like a bad thing, like, loyalty to a authority figure or a boss or a state or an idea is like we think of it as like blind loyalty, like, oh, you're just blindly loyal to somebody and you're letting them get away with things, or being a bad person, you're blindly loyal to your country, you're blindly loyal to your friend. And we kind of misunderstand the full picture of loyalty. And I'm going back to the early medieval period. We think about the origins of what we think of as the feudal system. It wasn't like a set structure the way we think about it, king, nobles, knights, peasants, that kind of thing. There was a great loyalty was a two-way street where a chieftain or warlord or a king and his warriors, his noble warriors, they pledged to him to follow him in war, defend his lands, cultivate his lands, enforce his will. And he, on the flip side, pledged loyalty to them to lead them well in war and to help them manage their lands and to provide for them and guide them through difficult times. And if either side of the equation wasn't working out, then a king was in trouble. That's why gift giving was such a huge thing between nobles and to kings and everything in early medieval times. But it was really a two-way street. It wasn't just follow the orders of the boss man, because that's some abstract concept of loyalty. It was very much he takes care of me and I owe it to him, so I'm going to do that. But if I feel like if he's not keeping up his end, then that is a very serious concern. We see some downfall of some figures who aren't able to keep that loyalty and trust with their underlings. So all that is to say, I think loyalty and thankfulness should really be brought back to reciprocity. If someone's taking care of you, you should be doing your best to take care of them. If someone buys you lunch, catch them up on dinner. Someone gives you a ride and they need help moving things, that kind of thing. It's the little things, and vice versa too. If there's continually somebody who takes and takes, I mean, we all know that one friend who likes to order the extra appetizers and the extra shots, and it's get you next time, and next time never comes. And it's like lack of loyalty. That is not loyal behavior. That is not reciprocal behavior. And that's not saying you should. And I think this is a terrible, terrible symptom of modern times where we kind of itemize everything as like a transaction, where it's like I've heard of friends and even couples who keep like ledgers of, well, I paid $24.95 last dinner, so now you owe me $24.95, and then you paid 30.32, so now I have a debt of X. And it's like, what are you? No, stop making it so neurotic and soulless. It's that goodwill of, they've got you and you've got them. That's what it should be about. Not trying to keep score like little freaking goblins. Um, and then there's the kind of loyalty too when we talk about loyalty to a friend, where it's like we are so quick now to disavow people when they screw up or do something bad, and it's like not convenient to be their friend anymore. You have to decide, like, yes, you absolutely, and it is part of loyalty to keep your friends in check, and if they're doing something wrong, to call them out on it. But it's something that should occur kind of within your circle, between you two, or between your friend group, not so you can appeal to outsiders as some, I'm a good person. See, look, I'm not their friend anymore. Now, of course, when someone does something truly terrible, um, you can't have somebody go on a orphanage murder spree and be like, well, yeah, but he's my friend. You gotta support your friends. It's like, okay. Extreme examples are always extreme examples. Exceptions are always exceptions, but again, it's a two-way street. You shouldn't be doing things that put your friends in dire straits. And you have to think, when you're out and about in the world, yes, it's your personal life, your personal actions, but they don't reflect just on you. And that's something I learned at my wrestling team and in fraternity life and everything. It's like what you do reflects on you, but it also reflects on your friends. One anecdote, I'm going to try not to go into too much detail, but I know somebody, and this was a while ago. Very good friend of mine, and I love him to death, still do. But talk about loyalty, he was caught attempting to not be loyal. And I didn't believe it at first. I thought I knew him well enough to know that he wouldn't do that, and I thought it was slanderous, and I staked out on that as I don't believe it's true. And then the evidence came out, and I looked like a fool, and because I had staked part of my reputation on our friendship. I was like, he's a good friend. I don't think he would do this. I don't believe it. And I argued that. And then, now, the evidence was brought, and I had to swallow my words and say, okay, I've been proven wrong, and it wasn't a huge deal. Didn't really harm our friendship, and nobody was angry at me for it. They understood we were friends. But some people thought I was covering for him on purpose, and it's like, there are people I would be willing to cover for on purpose in some situations, but cheating and all that, it was like, no, I don't support that behavior. I wouldn't have, caused a whole thing about it. But yeah, I looked like a fool and a liar. so that wasn't just disloyal of him to his partner. It was also, you know, disloyal to his friends that stuck their necks out there, and I wasn't the only one. But and that was a really non-important example. Nothing terrible happened as a result. It's just one of those things where it's like goes to show how loyalty can kind of work, and that you should take care when you are making decisions, and if you do screw up, you shouldn't expect your friends to necessarily rush to your defense all the time when you screw up. And I mean, I do things. I've done stupid things that have, getting too drunk out and about, and friends have to take care of you and help you out and get you out of bad situations, whatever. And it's like, if you abuse that trust too much, then you're not a good friend. And they'd be right to kind of get sick of your antics. So, really went all over the place with Thankfulness. It's my first time doing this kind of format, but I kind of love this, just having a few bullet points of topics and being able to dive into things that I can't, because I write so many scripts for TikTok and Instagram, but only a small portion of them ever actually make it to the filming and editing and posting. That's just how it is. I don't have enough time. There'll never be enough time. I create ideas too fast. So getting all my thoughts out on a variety of things in one recording, it's great. So hope you guys enjoy. I hope you guys enjoy your holiday with hopefully your loved ones, and I will catch you guys later.